Gosh, thank you. Thank you so much and welcome. I'm so happy to have you all here today. I'm John Holler, the president of the museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here on behalf of our trustees and our staff, our members, and our many volunteers, a lot of whom are in the audience this afternoon. How many of you are here for the very first time? Well, welcome. I want to send an especially warm welcome to you, and welcome back to all of you who didn't raise your hands. We're serving you lunch today. We've learned that a fed crowd is a happy crowd, so I hope that that's also to your liking. That's great. A big hand for the lunch. That's fantastic. We're so glad to have you here today because something really special is happening at the museum this week, and you're part of it now that you're here. And I just can't wait until we can get started so that you can learn all about it. Because what's happening is an expansion of the museum's work, and that expansion is really all about the progress of people, the progress of the Valley, and the progress of this institution. The information age may be the most transformational time in human history. Other transformations have been as great, but none have been as rapid. There have been locations in the world that have been as central to these transformations as Silicon Valley is to the information age. We think of Europe during the Renaissance. We think of the great dynasties of China. But no place has brought change that is so profound and also so universally felt. We are the only institution of our kind in the world that is attempting to document and interpret and preserve this change as it's happening in real time. I like to say, only half jokingly, that we may be the only history museum in the world that has more future than it does history. And this week we take a major step toward the expansion of that work and that sort of real-time tracking of this most transformational period. This work, like the information age itself, is a work in progress. Almost 60 years ago, Ken Olsen rescued pieces of the historic Whirlwind vacuum tube computer at MIT just as they were about to be scrapped, and that rescue project became the kernel that is now this museum. Over the years, with that kernel of a collection, we've become pretty good at collecting things. In fact, we now have a collection of 125,000 things. It's the largest collection of its kind in the world. Most of it could never be duplicated because, unlike the rescued Whirlwind, it's gone to scrap. And you're going to see some pretty amazing things around the room in just a few minutes. But things in computing are only part of the story. Another important part, of course, today is code and applications and services and platforms, the internet. And then next, and maybe most importantly, are the stories of the people and the world-changing businesses that they have built around the world. Today, you're going to begin to see how we are pivoting the Computer History Museum so that it can tell that complete story of computing. To use history as a platform now, not simply as a good in and of itself, which we'll always do, but to use history as a platform for exploring the impact of those forces of change within the information age on humankind and the technological, social, and economic implications of those changes for all of us in the future. And most of all, today, you're going to hear from a rare and wonderful group of people who have been near the center of that story for a long time and that transformation and are now very much a part of it today. Entrepreneurs in a creative and business ecosystem go hand in hand with the technology that is transforming our lives. Across the world, people want to understand entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship, especially as it's practiced in Silicon Valley. They want to understand why it happens, how it happens, what's special about the way that it works here. They want to understand who is making the difference. What are the problems and the opportunities that they've seen? What are the breakthroughs that they're producing? Who are the teams that they're calling together? What are the enterprises and industries that they're building? What is the impact on all of us, and what does that mean for us tomorrow? This week, we are launching Exponential. Exponential is a new center for entrepreneurship and innovation based here at the Computer History Museum, with the goal of helping to capture and tell and preserve that story and make those forward-looking connections. We're about $17 million into a $30 million campaign to fund this work and some other important work that's going on here at the museum. $10 million of that $30 million will be devoted to Exponential. Center Executive Director Marguerite Hancock and the museum staff have been working on Exponential now for 18 months with a large number of people both within and outside the museum. We have an advisory board that represents some of the most important and innovative and interesting investors and entrepreneurs anywhere in the world, and many of them are right here in Silicon Valley. You're going to hear about that from Marguerite in just a minute. But I think the most important thing I could say to you today is we're using our perspective and our experience as an institution that's been around for decades now, and our treasured role as what someone once described us as, which is the Switzerland of Silicon Valley, to place this change in a context that we think will help everyone understand why the information age is happening and where it's taking us. We're extraordinarily fortunate to have Marguerite Hancock aboard to lead this effort. We were able to recruit Marguerite from Stanford, where she had a brilliant 2-decade career in the Graduate School of Business, and she had in particular developed a worldwide reputation for studying and speaking and publishing about entrepreneurship and high-tech centers of innovation all over the world. She is going to be hosting our second panel today, but most importantly, she's the executive director of the entire center, and I'm happy to bring her to the stage now so you can learn a little bit more about Exponential. Please join me in welcoming Marguerite Hancock.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the museum. I'd like to add my welcome to each of you here today. And what an exciting time it is for the museum, for us as we launch the Exponential Center and the focus on capturing the legacy and lessons of the pioneering people, companies, and communities like Silicon Valley and around the world that are transforming how we live, work, and play, and to use those to inspire, inform, and we hope influence the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs. I'd like to share with you now a short video that talks a little bit about the Exponential Center.
One idea can create a billion devices. One idea can become a billion-dollar company. One idea can touch a billion people. Iconic companies and Silicon Valley are proof that the exponential power of innovation and entrepreneurship surrounds us. For the last half-century, they have revolutionized how people around the globe live, work, and play. But how did it happen? How does Silicon Valley work? How does one idea translate into exponential impact?
To answer these questions, the Computer History Museum is expanding its work and launching the Exponential Center to explore the worldwide impact of innovation and entrepreneurship.
The Exponential Center is focused on 5 key initiatives: extraordinary exhibitions and comprehensive collections, digitally accessible content and dynamic workshops, museum experts and university collaborators advance research, innovative live programming bring compelling stories to life. The Exponential Center convenes leaders to influence action for entrepreneurial communities.
We're exploring the people, the companies, and the communities that are transforming our world through exponential technology innovation, economic value creation, and social impact.
The Exponential Center will capture the legendary past and inform, influence, and inspire the next generation of innovators, entrepreneurs, and leaders who will change the world. The Exponential Center at the Computer History Museum starts now.
One idea, one person can create exponential impact. Here, we have one first product from Hewlett-Packard in the original garage, the HP oscillator, and from what Bill and Dave started in that garage, grew to be one of the first and iconic companies here in Silicon Valley. Hewlett-Packard, now 2 companies worth $52 billion. Here, one set of engineering notebooks with Jay Last and Gordon Morris here on display spawned the now $360 billion semiconductor industry, silicon at the heart of Silicon Valley. Next to it, the Microsoft Altair Basic, one first product written in 1975 and distributed on a paper tape like this one signed by Bill Gates and Paul Allen, created the foundation for Microsoft software, including Microsoft Office, now used by 1.2 billion people around the world. The Apple offering memo, one risky business plan, outlining perhaps maybe 100,000 personal computers for Apple, gave rise to now 1 billion devices, Apple devices, and the most valuable company on NASDAQ, over $510 billion market cap. The Cisco router, AGS router, 1986, first product launched, catalyzed Cisco to be a leading provider of the network infrastructure, now with 3.4 billion internet users in the world, about 46% of the world's population. Google, one invention in Google, AdWords revolutionized the business model, right, for online advertising. Google now powers over 3.5 billion searches per day, people finding access to the world's information. Tombstones, mementos of important deals. One lawyer, in this case, Larry Sonsini, 23 deals that he's been involved with are represented here, pioneered how legal profession could be partners with entrepreneurs. Wilson Sonsini has served over 3,000 entrepreneurs, and in the last 5 years alone, helped them raise over $50 billion. Last but not least, the Facebook motherboard, created for the Open Compute Server project to help bring green energy efficiency for data centers, revolutionizing how open source could be used for hardware for data servers, and also turning on its head the $141 billion data server market. How do these ideas and the people get turned into products, services, companies, and industries that are changing the world? That's really at the heart of what the Exponential Center is doing. And today you'll see on stage people who have been at the heart of that, from the early days of the Valley to current entrepreneurs. So we invite you to join us. Join us because your story is a part of the story that we're telling of how innovation and entrepreneurship come together for exponential impact. Thank you very much and enjoy today.
1 to a billion. 1 to a billion. What a powerful idea. So here's one idea that's even more powerful than 1 to a billion. 1 to a zettabyte. Do you know how much a zettabyte is? Anyone? Surely there's many engineers in the room. Somebody knows what a zettabyte is. 10 to the 21st power. I once asked David Brock, who you're about to meet in a second, what in the world exists in quantities of 10 to the 21st power? And David came up with a really powerful statistic. He said that natural scientists, having studied this, now estimate that if you counted every single grain of sand on every beach in all the world, you'd count about 10 to the 21st power. That's about a zettabyte of grains of sand in the world. And it's now estimated that that is how many silicon-based transistors exist and operate in the world today. A zettabyte of silicon-based transistors. Those transistors on microchips all over the world are now the single most made thing in the history of humanity. And of course, a tremendous leap forward in the technology of those transistors happened right here, just a few miles away at Fairchild Semiconductor. And one of the men who were responsible for that is here with us today to share that story and some of his insights, Dr. Jay Last. Jay Last was employed by William Shockley, the Nobel Prize winner, after he received his PhD in physics from MIT. And in 1957, was one of the traitorous eight, the so-called traitorous eight, who walked out on William Shockley en masse to start Fairchild Semiconductor. There he led the research and development group, working under Bob Noyce and, of course, with Gordon Moore and the other legendary figures in that field, who developed the design for the integrated circuit and the first IC chips. In 1961, Jay joined Harry Singleton at Teledyne Incorporated and set up a semiconductor division with another of the traitorous eight from Fairchild, John Doerr. And they developed and manufactured complex integrated circuit chips for Teledyne, which was then doing some incredibly visionary and forward-looking science in space and military applications, including the first U.S. voyages to the moon. He then became Teledyne's vice president for technology, overseeing technical interaction of Teledyne's divisions. There were 150 divisions at the time that Jay was overseeing them in the 1970s. After leaving Teledyne, Jay proved to us all, as many people in the field have, that a lot of great technologists, in the words of Steve Jobs, stand at the intersection of technology and the humanities. So when he left his high-tech world, Jay founded Hillcrest Press and has devoted much of his life to writing and publishing books dealing with California art, ethnic art, and graphic arts, and he is one of the leaders in the world in archaeological conservancy. In fact, he founded the Archaeological Conservancy, which is dedicated to saving American archaeological sites, and that's how Jay has devoted a great deal of the time that he spends today on issues when he's not thinking about technology. With Jay Last today in our panel is the gentleman that I mentioned before, David Brock. David has now joined us to become the director of a second center, which we've now formed here at the museum, a Center for Software History. He came to us from the Chemical Heritage Foundation, where he did important work in research in the semiconductor industry. He's the co-author with Arnold Thackeray of the epic and definitive biography of Gordon Moore, Moore's Law, The Life of Gordon Moore, Silicon Valley's Quiet Revolutionary, which was published last year, in which we had a premiere event for at the museum, and I hope you saw that. We're selling it down in the store if you're interested. It's really a wonderful book. He's a writer. He served as an executive producer for several documentary shorts and hour-long television documentaries on people like Gordon Moore and Arnold Beckman. We're going to talk about the history of the integrated circuit and the exponential impact that it has had on all of us. And you're going to be hearing from a third person by videotape, Gordon Moore himself. Last year was the 50th anniversary of the publication of Gordon's famous essay in Electronics magazine, setting forth the precept we've now all come to know as Moore's Law. Gordon's going to talk a little bit about his vision for the integrated circuit as it started so long ago, and give us his views on the impact on all of us. So please enjoy this next panel, and we'll be joined by David Brock and Jay Last now, and Gordon Moore by video. Come on up, guys.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to have to adjust my starting remarks on the fly because John did such a wonderful job of inadvertently stealing my thunder. But I really just am delighted to have the chance to be here today to engage with these two remarkable scientist entrepreneurs who played critical parts, as we've heard, in the emergence of the silicon microchip and of Silicon Valley as we know it. Gordon Moore will be joining us in a moment, not physically, but through an array of silicon and digital technologies to provide a video commentary that he prepared especially for us today. And I'm very happy that Jay Last is here in good old-fashioned analog form with me on the stage today. John provided a great introduction to both Gordon and Jay, so let me just eliminate that page and turn to this to say that Jay Last and Gordon Moore were members of this group of 8 scientists and engineers who together left Shockley's laboratory to establish Fairchild Semiconductor, where Jay's team created the planar integrated circuit in Gordon's lab. The silicon microchip truly is the foundation for the digital world. So today, we'll discuss some of what these scientist entrepreneurs make of their experiences with this truly transformative technology. So perhaps now let's hear from Gordon Moore.
Okay, well, Silicon Valley has certainly become a center of entrepreneurship. And I think this is driven to a considerable extent by what happened in the early semiconductor industry. Before that, the companies that were here tended to be quite stable. They were companies like Hewlett-Packard and Varian that had developed significant businesses but stayed together. But when the silicon got here, initially with Bill Shockley, things began to change. Bill was setting up a new company and hired several of us. And after some problems with his management style, a group of us decided we had to leave. And fortunately, one of the group contacted a friend of his father's who'd been a stockbroker and said, there are a bunch of us who like working together. We're all looking for jobs. Is there a company that'd like to hire us all? And that was really, I think, a major step in the beginning of the entrepreneurship. Although none of us were really entrepreneurs then, it kind of tipped the scale in that direction. Fairchild Semiconductor, which was what was founded by this group after a search where everybody else turned them down, then became a hotbed of innovation and entrepreneurship. It seemed like every time we had a new product idea, we had several spin-offs. And most of the companies around here, even today, you can probably trace their lineage back to what happened at Fairchild. It was really the place that got the engineer entrepreneur really moving. I benefited from that, being first involved in the Fairchild group, and then several years later with Bob Noyce founded Intel. I guess by that time I had become an entrepreneur, although I always characterized myself as an accidental entrepreneur. Had it not been for the negative experience at Shockley, it's doubtful I ever would have taken the entrepreneurial route. The transition from the transistors to the integrated circuit wasn't an easy birth. Jay Lass can tell you about that. He was responsible for the program at Fairchild in those days. The things we tried to do initially were really quite difficult. In fact, we processed silicon wafers at such high temperature and for so long that they came out looking like potato chips, all curled. We didn't have a good process for the first couple of years, and it was a struggle to make the few integrated circuits we did. But then we got a couple of new technologies. In particular, we got epitaxial growth, which gave us a lot more flexibility in the structures we could build. And that was a major breakthrough. I guess the next transition after that was the movement from bipolar transistors, which were fast but difficult to make, to MOS transistors, which at the time were relatively slow, but had tremendous advantage for making complex arrays. And the technology has continued to evolve through a variety of steps that let us make more and more complex things. And transistors have gotten cheaper and cheaper. Some of the most recent circuits have literally billions of transistors on a chip and sell for dollars. Our first transistors we sold for $150 a piece. Now you can get a transistor for a nanobuck if you buy enough of them at one time. A complicated technology like semiconductors and the devices you build is a result of the contributions of a whole lot of people. Now, along the way, there will be some especially important ones. It could have been the planar transistor at Fairchild, the integrated circuit, the microprocessor. Those are the things that you tend to emphasize as the appropriate steps. But every one of those has a whole bunch of detailed steps underneath it that's necessary to make it successful. When we set up Intel, for example, we had to get to about 100 people before we had all the bases covered. It just required that broad and that many different things being tackled at the same time. This included the various steps in the processing technology, the circuit design, the testing, and such mundane things as keeping the facilities working. It's a complicated operation. It requires a lot of various talents. I think that's the case with most of these businesses. One person may get credit as having the basic idea that was being pursued, but it's usually the output of a group that makes it successful.
Well, Jay, I suppose in the nature of this event, it is your prerogative to have the last word.
Okay.
And I just wondered if there was anything, any immediate reaction you had to Gordon's comments.
Well, I think it was a very good summary of what happened. The point that he made that we really were not entrepreneurs trying to start a business. We were really just looking for a job someplace where the group of us turned out to be very compatible. We knew we were going to leave Shockley, and we wanted to find some way to keep working together. I was just a year away from getting my degree, and none of us had any business experience, especially me, I think. But so. If it hadn't been for Art Rock and Bud Coyle at Hayden Stone, they came and put the idea in our head to start our own. We could really accomplish what we wanted to do best by starting our own company. But we were, as Gordon said, we was really accidental entrepreneurs. The world was a different place then. Silicon Valley was, it was apricot oriented.
I suppose one option would have been when you all felt that the bridges had been burned at Shockley. You could have each gone your separate ways. There was, a great demand for people with any measure of contact with silicon technology.
Yeah.
What do you think was the overriding interest or impulse to stay together as a group?
We liked each other. We worked well together. We were together socially. We saw that each of us, Shockley had done a good job recruiting, and we each had a different talent than the others. So none of us could have continued in the transistor world independently. The group was so much more powerful than the individuals. I would have certainly left the transistor field if I had left. I would have gone. I got my degree in solid state physics, and there were other things that even at that time were of equal interest to me.
If the group had no business experience, direct business experience amongst the group, could you talk about briefly how you acquired that business experience for the organization?
Well, we worked together as a group and built the first transistors, which the reason we picked this particular transistor, we found a customer, IBM, that wanted to buy 100 of these devices, and we thought that was as good a thing as to work on as anything else. We sold these devices for, as I just said, for very high price. I think part of our business success is that we were successful, and could afford to make mistakes. We made our share of them, but we weren't under any really strong financial pressure.
And then at some point you were involved in the unusual activity of hiring a manager for your
Yes. When we got to the point where we had to build up a sales force and start doing things like advertising our products, dealing with customers, we knew we needed somebody with experience, so we hired Ed Baldwin, who had a great deal of this experience. It's a very interesting experience to hire your boss, but and it turned out that after not too long a period, it turned out it didn't work. But it was Ed pointed out to us a number of things that we hadn't thought an awful lot about. The key thing that Ed taught us was you have to make a reliable product. If your product is unreliable, you're out of business, especially for the customers we had then, which were strictly military customers, mainly airborne computers. These things had to work. So Ed's lesson of pointing out reliability was key.
Well, when I woke up this morning and was thinking about the opportunity for this audience to hear from you, Jay, I realized that we should really concentrate on your experience of the emergence of the microchip. If we don't do that, it would be a bit like having a chance to chat with James Watt, but then not really talk about the story of the steam engine, a missed opportunity to say the least. So, if I could just frame that the microchip really emerged during a remarkable 6-year period for you. And I'd just like to quickly trace that period and then have you reflect upon it. So in 1956, you were recruited by Shockley into his laboratory to help manufacture the diffuse silicon transistor. In 1957, you and your compatriots left Shockley, became entrepreneurs, founding Fairchild to finish the job of manufacturing the diffuse silicon transistor. In 58, you succeeded, and Fairchild's transistor was a technological and commercial success. In 59, Fairchild introduced a radical improvement, Jean Reni's planar transistor, and you started a program to make a silicon integrated circuit built from planar devices. In 1960, your team explored a variety of avenues toward the integrated circuit and successfully produced the planar integrated circuit, the silicon microchip as we have known it. And then early in 1961, you and Jean Reni left Fairchild to participate in the startup of Teledyne, creating perhaps the first commercial organization wholly devoted to the silicon microchip. So in sum, that's 2 successful startups and the development of the silicon microchip between the ages of, I think, 27 and 32. So I'm just wondering if you had to choose a single factor or a few elements that were kind of essential to this incredible story, what would it or they be?
Well, looking at Fairchild at that time, it was an astoundingly successful transistor company. And all of the efforts of the company were spent on developing new transistors and learning how to sell them, dealing with our customers. TI, who was very aggressive with patent enforcement, was showing signs of doing something like the first integrated circuit, and we felt that we were going to have to do something as sort of a defensive measure, if nothing else. And it was a very separate operation. It was way out of the mainstream at Fairchild at the time, so I could just go off with the group I assembled and do this. a key thing was that the integrated circuit involved some new technologies, but we could draw on all the experience that was being gained on transistors to do this.
How big was your group pursuing the integrated circuit?
About 10. And we worked together for a year and made the first transistor after a year's work. It was very difficult to make these things, and people say, "What did you see for the future of this device?" Now they always say, "What were you thinking about the future of this device?" I was just thinking, how can I make them at any yield that would be more than a laboratory curiosity? So, the transistor, I mean, the integrated circuit now looks like it just felt like a comet coming out, but it really was a slow slog for years before it was really accepted. When the transistor was, when the integrated circuit, I think, I forget the numbers exactly, but when the integrated circuit was 6 years old, the sales were $80 million in the country. That's 25 cents for everybody in the country. It just wasn't a big thing.
Well, at what point at some point after, your group's realization of the planar integrated circuit, you had enough kind of belief in its future to, create this operation at Teledyne on that basis. Could you talk, was there anything in particular that really convinced you?
The thing that convinced me was, as I had just said, that Fairchild was a very successful transistor company. The salespeople started looking at this and said, the integrated circuit, we sell our transistors to circuit designers, and that we're destroying the market that we have for transistors if we start getting into computers. So there was active opposition to the integrated circuit on the part of a lot of people at Fairchild. And I was, through Art Rock, was approached to introduce me to Henry Singleton, who was starting a systems company, and he saw the need for integrated circuits there. I have never taken too kindly to have a boss, but Henry Singleton was a unique person. I worked very willingly for him for many years after that. But this was a way I could see to really start moving integrated circuits, and we assembled a very high technology group at Teledyne and made really some remarkable devices. Unfortunately, this was all for military systems and classified military systems, so very little of this history exists now. But we did a pretty good job there.
Jay, I think maybe I'll push things and ask one last question to you. I know we're coming to the end of our time. But maybe just to ask you, at what point, in the story of the silicon microchip that you realized not only that it was, a going concern, but something actually kind of monumental?
I think some of the devices we made at Teledyne convinced me that this device really had a future. By then, we were getting good enough to make them that we could see that the devices that we could make them at a reasonable price. We're still fairly far away from the commercial market. That happened with Intel and some other companies later on, but we could see that. I always had a lot of faith in the device, but this was always tempered by the difficulty of making them, working with them.
Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for our discussion. Won't you all join me in thanking both Jay and Gordon for sharing their stories with us today?
I had no idea I was stealing David's thunder. I'm very embarrassed now. One thing I'm quite sure is I'm not going to steal the thunder of our next guest, Regis McKenna. No one could steal the thunder of Regis McKenna. Many have tried, and they've all failed. Regis McKenna is the link between entrepreneurship and business success, and he has been for his entire career. He formed Regis McKenna Incorporated in 1970, and very quickly became an absolutely invaluable member of the brain trust of the entrepreneurs and CEOs of some of the leading companies in Silicon Valley and therefore of the information age. Apple, Intel, Genentech, Microsoft. The list goes on and on. In fact, it would be easier to list the companies that Regis has not influenced in some way during his long career. Regis is a member of the advisory board for the Exponential Center. He's been invaluable for us as well, and you quickly learn working with Regis that Regis is known for marketing, but Regis is really someone who understands the way the world works and how to build a strategy behind that knowledge, and he's just a really remarkable person. He's going to be interviewed in this next segment by Marguerite Hancock, so please join me in welcoming Regis and Marguerite.
Hello.
That was a wonderful session with Jay.
It was wonderful to have Jay here. Thank you, Jay and David.
Thanks, Jay.
Well, what a delight it is to welcome to the stage Regis, who's, as John has said, been a luminary here for the Valley, explaining not only what it is, but in building it over time, and a founding advisor of the Exponential Center and a friend now. So thank you, Regis, for joining us.
You're welcome.
The topic for today for our conversation, is looking at two sides of the coin. In the midst of rapid technology change and technologies that are fundamentally changing how people work, there's also the other side of the story, which is how do people respond to it? How do users understand what these new technologies are and become customers and users? And that's what Regis and I are going to talk about today. So Regis, I'd like to kind of take us back before the digital time that we're talking about today, and if you could sort of set the stage for us, what was it like in the pre-digital era? Because you came to the Valley before the time of Silicon. What was it like to be marketing in that pre-digital time?
Well, some of my experiences overlap with Jay's. Actually, Jay, I brought a transistor. This is a 2-lead transistor. But this is about 1965, Sarah. I don't know, you probably can't even see it, right? This watch has 1 billion in it. So you can imagine where that's the span of my...
1 to 1 billion.
Because this was an early technology. The technology in those areas was very much more personal in the sense that it was engineer to engineer. But you know, and it's where I developed a lot of the ideas that I had, because you know, the consumer marketing, which everybody thought was somehow or other a little bit above what they were doing here, because they called it sort of industrial marketing, was less sophisticated, I might say. But it wasn't. It was very sophisticated. And although Jay said they weren't businessmen, or he said perhaps he would say he wasn't a marketing guy, I'm sure he was involved in a lot of meetings with customers. And in customer meetings, there's a feedback loop. And you're hearing them and they're hearing you. And you're educating them about what you're doing, and you're trying to show them how they can apply this in a certain way. And in those days, they had a sales force, but the key people in the sales force were application engineers. And application engineers were teachers. And they basically worked with customers to show them how to apply the products in a specific way. It was done very, very personal and one-to-one. But it was a different world. When I first started at a company called General Microelectronics in 1965, and they'd been around a couple years, they were one of the early spin-offs of Fairchild. And I ran a large technical writing group, and we did proposals. We all had security clearances, and so I had a secret clearance, because we worked on proposals to many of the Air Force clients out there, customers out there. And so you were doing marketing, but it was in a much more one-to-one, and it was much more interactive. And the things weren't very complex in the sense of the selling process. It was, and also in those days, engineers read magazines. The trade press became really paramount in communicating. And so, I gave a group of ads to the museum recently, and back from many of those early days. But they were debated, highly debated by customers, and you'd get a lot of feedback from particularly people who were either using competitive product or your product, and there was a tremendous amount of energy around the whole company involved in new products and new activities that were really constant here in that early period.
Can you give us an example about a debate about a specific ad or a product that kind of captured the spirit of that time?
The first microprocessors were that way. There was always benchmarks were published in the trade magazines as to who had the greater performance, latency or speed, or power or whatever the measurements were on the particular benchmarks. And I know that it was almost like a boxing match between Intel and Motorola, publishing back and forth their benchmarks in the various trade magazines. And if one had an edge on the other, there were engineers lined up at my door. It was engineers. The idea that the engineers weren't businessmen, just by my comment on that, was true for everybody here. Nobody was experienced because things were moving so rapidly that everybody was experimenting as they go and trying things, and that's how you learned. But in those days, as I said, the change really came. There were no journalist offices out here. There were trade magazines. We hired a bunch of technical writers at my company early on, and we wrote articles for our companies and had them published in the trade magazines. But I spent most of my time, or a lot of my time, in New York City selling them. You could go into the media, and in fact, in the late 70s, I had one of the well-known business magazines return Intel's press release to me saying, "Please take us off the mailing list." I also was told by an analyst in New York City, I think he was with Merrill Lynch, and he said, there are no new companies that are of interest to us except because we don't think they're going to survive the build-up, and they don't have the money and the resources to build an infrastructure for a narrow product line.
How little did they know?
And
well, let's kind of jump forward and think about, so that was the pre-digital time, and then we're coming on with microprocessing, and we're starting to say that the real change came with the change in technology, and how did that impact?
Technology drives marketing. It really does. It's there first. And what came about was really the microprocessor. The microprocessor started, it is something that's infinitely programmable. And so, programmability really changed everything, because now you could make things the way the customer wanted them to be made. And you could change it, through microprogramming, not through having to actually run a device back through the process again. And so when that ended up in a PC, which took a long while to develop, it changed everything, because now journalists had something on their desk that you could talk about, and you could say what's inside that's important. They had nothing before, no reference point. So what happens is that, particularly when we had this sort of profusion of relatively first-time things, the first microprocessor, or even the first integrated circuits, the first laser for low-powered lasers for going into reading labels and so forth in supermarkets, the first recombinant DNA technology out of the biotech world. Any of these first-time technologies, people don't have a reference point for them. It's not a retrofit. You're not thinking, oh, I'm going to replace my refrigerator with something, or my car. It's something totally out of their world of experiences. So it really, marketing becomes education. And we didn't have the tools in those days to actually do it broadly, so you had to do it in seminars and workshops. And for the launch of the microprocessor at Intel, we put on more seminars and workshops than probably some of the junior colleges around here on how to apply a microprocessor to your applications.
I'd like to talk more about that time. You were you're pioneering how to educate people, how to make this a conversation between new users with the technologists and the new companies. We've talked about some of the early decisions you made with Intel, and also with Apple. We have here on display one of the first proof ads of Apple with its new color logo. Maybe you could give us an example of that new kind of personal computing coming out, some of the decisions that you made with that new technology, and how you were talking about that through your marketing with new users.
Yeah, one of the advantages of starting out in the semiconductor industry, and I was, as I said, I was one of the early people at a company called General Microelectronics, but then I was also one of the handful of people that was at the beginning of National Semiconductor, is that you see these end-use applications. And you sort of know the process, and you know what things are capable of. These are small companies at the time, so you know the president and you know the shipping clerk, and you know the processes because they're right there in front of you, and you can put on a white coat and walk through all of the labs. There was no sort of clean rooms of the same nature that there are today. And what it came about was this whole idea that, particularly at Apple, is that there was a precursor to that. Intel actually ran an ad in Byte magazine 6 months before Apple was even incorporated on a single board computer for hobbies. And they were thinking about going into the personal computer business. The Altair 8080 microprocessor was out a couple years before Apple. And I knew about them because we were all looking for applications at Intel, and we kept trying to write up the applications that they were using. So going into Apple, it wasn't something like, oh, you met these two sort of strange people in my office, and they were strange. When I sent them to Don Valentine, just an anecdote, Valentine called me up, the venture capitalist. I sent him to Don and said, Steve, and he called me up and he said, why did you send me these renegades from the human race?
Renegades from the human race.
Right.
That's good.
But, the whole idea of knowing that they're going into the computer business now is, time and place becomes so important. This was an era when Tom Peters was so successful in talking about, models of successful American companies, because almost all of our consumer electronics had gone to Asia. And in fact, the semiconductor industry itself was very on the verge of losing its weight here in the United States. And so there was this huge external competitive force that was weighing on us. So how would Apple succeed? And one of the things was and the fact that it was with hobbyists, which was a very, very small market. That's the reason Intel didn't go into it, because Andy Grove went to one of the hobby shows, and he said, these are just a bunch of hobbyists, and so it wasn't going to be much of a market. But the whole idea, and one of the things you showed on the introduction was my notebooks. I've kept notebooks since 1970. And it was the first marketing plan for Apple, and it was in December of '76. And in there, I talk about Apple stores. So we were talking about how do we distribute this, because there were no distribution channels. Where would you sell something that needs education when you sell it? It's almost like selling a piano. You got to sell instructions with it. And so the change came about because of the technology driving up these new applications. But now we had to educate people as to what do you do with this thing? And in fact, much of the conversation at the early PC was, what do I do with it? And much of the conversation on the internet was, there's nothing of value worth looking at it. People don't remember that, but a lot of people don't. But there was a lot of junk on it, but there was not anything of value to interact with. And so all of technologies are never born perfect. They all take some time to grow, some time to educate the market. Sometimes it's fast. And the microprocessor, the first one was in '71. But it didn't take off till '83 when the IBM PC took off. And that saved Intel. They probably wouldn't be around today if it were not for that particular event.
I like the way that you've taken us from the early microprocessor to home computing and then personal computing and then to the internet. Let's talk about changes in the internet, a fundamental change where it becomes two-way. It's not just broadcasting, there's access. How do you see that technology change and the relationship with marketing in this era?
It's pretty phenomenal, I think. The changes that are going on. First of all, marketing in general has been being automated. Almost everything that can be codified can be automated. And more and more of the marketing, I would say as much as 80% of marketing. Now, I define marketing in a very broad sense. Apple's biggest marketing weapon is its logistics. And for two reasons. When Tim Cook came in, he basically outsourced all of Apple's development activities and manufacturing activities. That made Apple instantly profitable because Apple was a company that wanted to make everything. Rather than design things, they really wanted to make it all. And that change itself and the ability to manage that in a really efficient way, and they are the #1 logistics company for about the last 8 years in the world, is a marvelous marketing tool. That's what we used to call distribution. And they manage it now, but it's no longer under marketing. It's under a vice president of logistics or some such title. And so more and more of the marketing is essentially being represented in software in some way or another. And further, it's being represented in real time. So, what happens today with the profusion of data, we hear this term big data. Big data is a combination of structured and unstructured data, plus coming in the Internet of Things. So we're talking about hundreds of millions, if not billions, of information segments coming into any particular producer at any one time. And how do you manage all that data? And the key thing is you can't manage it, you can't store it, because it's no value. Unstructured data is no value unless you use it when it's happening. It's gone. So unstructured like Facebook or conversations or whatever, this is fleeting data. You got to know where the person is, what they're doing at the very time, and you got to feed it back to them at that instant. That's when they need it. So doing logistics and doing analytics, and having, AI underneath it all to be able to manage all this is, I think, where we're going to see marketing. It's going to be much more machine to machine and people to machine than perhaps a lot of people would like to think it would be. We don't necessarily have control over that. It creeps up on you and just takes over your world.
Speaking of taking over your world, we have in the audience here, as well as viewers of our digital content, entrepreneurs who are thinking about marketing now in real time, using the technology tools and platforms of today. Words of advice, questions that they should be asking.
Yeah, I think, again, Jay Les said the advice he got from the first president they brought in was build a reliable product. And there's really some interesting cases in the news of the last year of entrepreneurs who really don't think that it's the product that really counts. I wrote an article in mid-90s actually for Harvard Business Review called "Marketing is Everything." And that's the point. Marketing isn't a function within a company. It's everybody's job. It's like quality. So building a good, reliable product is basically marketing because it satisfies customers. Building a product that has built-in feedback systems, very important. And so, all the aspects of your business are part of it. And you got to start thinking about that from the beginning because there's a culture of thought process about how everybody is engaged in interacting and satisfying customers. And that goes from the board all the way down to as I said, the people at the desk at the counter in the retail store. And I think increasingly, because we're all connected, that's what's happening. It's not, I won't say it's real efficient, but it is becoming much more of a standard. And there are companies who I think are trying to do that. For everything from product definition or feedback from customers. You can look at Google, Amazon, Apple, eBay. These are companies who are much more oriented toward networks and software programmability, so as to constantly come up with algorithms, to look at what customers are coming in, how to analyze that data, how to actually change your data. So if you think about it, marketing to me is this sort of education process in which the closed loop system, your customers learn and you learn back and forth, and it's reciprocal. And that's how markets grow, and you've got to figure out the most efficient means of doing that.
Well, thank you, Regis. Our time is too fast. I feel like I've had to buckle my seatbelt, and you've done a flyover of amazing technology change. As you think about sort of the exponential impact of technology and marketing, closing thoughts for our audience today.
Well, I think about my time here in Silicon Valley, almost 55 years, and going from a transistor to this. And I'm on the board of a nano company, which a nanocrystal is 175,000 times smaller than the width of a human hair. Yeah, I'm actually already there, but having that span and with the increased amount of technical knowledge that is. There's a report recently that IBM said it used to double every 2 years. We say it's doubling every 2 years, every 5 years. So and a report from IBM said it's now going to be doubling every 13 hours. So hang on. Hang on. The next 10, 20 years are going to be act like it's going to be the last 50.
Well, with that, hang on. Thank you, Regis McKenna.
So if Jay Last and Gordon Moore represent a legendary generation of pioneers, and Regis represents an entirely legendary way of thinking about marketing new technology, our third panel represents what's happening in entrepreneurship today, and a moderator who is his own brand name in the venture community that makes entrepreneurship happen. Mike and Albert Lee are brothers, and they founded MyFitnessPal, a company that you may know of and a device that you may even own. They had a very successful exit thanks to Under Armour not long ago, which I'm sure you're going to hear about. Mike is now the Chief Digital Officer at Under Armour, and Albert is the Vice President of Product for Connected Fitness North America, both at Under Armour. And interviewing them will be someone who knows them very well, and that you may know very well, John Doerr, who is now the chairman and has always been such a legendary figure at Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield & Byers. Please welcome them to the stage now, and we'll hear about entrepreneurship and what's happening.
Well, we're in for a treat, something very special. When I learned about what the Exponent initiative and center is all about, namely encouraging entrepreneurship, it didn't take me long to figure out who would be two of the most inspirational entrepreneurs for folks all around the globe, in this audience, but also available via video. And they are the two brothers, Michael and Albert Lee, who co-founded MyFitnessPal in 2005. Isn't that right?
That's right.
And then bootstrapped the business for years and years and years, built an amazing business, and then decided that they wanted to take some venture capital. We'll learn why or why not in just a moment. And today they are responsible for and running the largest community of people committed to health and fitness online with their flagship application, MyFitnessPal. So let's get right to it. Why don't each of you tell us your story? How did you develop the desire and drive to make a great new business?
Yeah. Well, I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I love building products that people love. But I have to say, MyFitnessPal was sort of an accident, even though I had all these passions. The way the business got started was my wife and I were getting married. We were going to have a beach wedding, And a few months before the day, we said, oh, maybe we ought to lose a little weight. And so we went to see a trainer. The trainer told us we had to count calories. We were supposed to record everything that we were eating, and gave us a little book. It was about this big, and we were supposed to write everything down. And I'm a tech person. I love technology, so there was no way I was going to do this on pen and paper. I took the book, I threw it out. It didn't even make it out of the gym, I don't think. And I looked for
it.
Yes, I recycled it, of course. It's California, right? And then, I looked for a website, and this was a while back. So I looked for a mobile app.
There was a web.
There was a web. There was a web, and there was mobile, although it was Palm. So it was Palm OS actually that I was trying to find an app for. And there were dozens of websites and apps that tried to help you do this, but they were all terrible. It was actually easier to write it down on pen and paper than it was to use these things. And so that's where the idea for MyFitnessPal came from. I just said, I'll just build the thing that I want. And that's how the company got started.
And had you worked in technology before MyFitness?
I had. I actually worked briefly at Regis McKenna.
Yes.
That was my first start in Silicon Valley, but I had worked at a bunch of different startups. But I had actually been in sales and marketing. I hadn't programmed in years. I programmed so much when I was a kid that I got sick of it, which was unfortunate, actually, because I wish I had done it sooner. But MyFitnessPal was my way to get back into engineering, and I just loved it. And
so you wrote code?
I did, to the great chagrin of my current engineering team, who has to deal with the legacy of
Is
my
any of that code still running?
Unfortunately, it is.
That's actually one of our key strategic initiatives, is to get rid of all of it.
Get rid of the CEO's code. So Albert, what's your story, and how did you decide to start a company with your brother?
Yeah, so I've been here in the Silicon Valley since 1999. I actually came out, I was working not too far from here at Yahoo for a bunch of years. And then I moved on and I was working at eBay, so have been working in technology for almost 17 years now. People have asked me a lot, actually, like, how did your brother ask you to join him and work on him? And I always kind of joke, I'm like, there was never really a question phrased. It was sort of like one day he kind of tapped me on the shoulder. He's like, Albert, I really want to work a lot harder on MyFitnessPal, and you need to do it too. So you got to quit your job.
Yeah. You can tell who the older brother is.
Yeah, we're going to start working on this together.
Did he offer to pay you?
Eventually. Yeah, it was not a precursor to me agreeing.
Did you have a choice?
I guess.
No, I don't
not
think so.
really.
No,
not really.
Think so.
I mean, does any younger brother ever have a choice?
I would
with their
have
older brother
given him a noogie until he said yes.
Yeah. But I think I was also really excited about the idea of us working together and certainly trying to build something together. I think we were both. That's really what we set out to do, I think, in the beginning.
It ended up being, though, such a fun product to work on because you're changing lives. You're making, the users that email us, they tell us these incredible stories. The emails we get are amazing. There are all these stories of people who have avoided surgery, or they've nothing has ever worked for them before. MyFitnessPal is the first thing that's ever worked for them. Or one of my favorites is this woman who, she talked about how in 20 years she hadn't been able to get up out of a chair without using her arms to push herself up, and she did it for the first time in 20 years, and she cried. It was such a meaningful moment for her.
Wow.
And to be able to work on something like that, there are users that give us way too much credit. They say that we saved their lives, and we didn't. They're the ones that are doing all the hard work. They're the ones that are making all these incredible changes. But to be able to play just a little part in that journey is just incredibly rewarding.
And how many journeys are you involved in right now? How many?
MyFitnessPal is over 110 million users. At Under Armour Connected Fitness, it's over 170 million.
Wow.
So that's really fun too, to be able to work on something that.
I want to come back to Under Armour, but just in a couple of minutes.
Yep.
Do you have a funniest story about your users, or a most tragic story about a user?
Oh, wow.
How about an extreme?
Well, there was that one time. So in the beginning, we were bootstrapped, as John was saying, and we didn't have any money. We were no salaries, as Al complained about constantly, and we just took every dollar that we had back into the business. And so we had this little office in San Carlos. It was terrible. It was one of those offices that had the the brown sliding thing in the door that just said MyFitnessPal on it. It was kind of like a doctor's office. That was our signage, you know. And one day we were at the office and somebody knocked on the door, and nobody ever knocked on our door. It was just me and Albert. We had no meetings. We didn't know who it was. And we opened the door, and this woman said, you know, and she said, is this the MyFitnessPal office? And I said, yeah, it is. And she's like, I love MyFitnessPal. I was here for another thing, and I just wanted to say hi. And I turned around, and my vice is Diet Coke. I'm a health and fitness guy, but I can't stop drinking Diet Coke. So, and my desk had just these piles of Diet Coke cans on it, and I was so embarrassed. I was like, oh no, like, don't look over here, you know. But it was very flattering that she wanted to stop by. And
we were a little worried that having her kind of see behind the curtain, she would no longer be that excited about using MyFitnessPal.
Yeah, this is two guys in a room.
So they say there's a revolution underway in digital health,
yeah,
right? And
yeah.
all these smart watches and Fitbits and so forth. And if you agree, will you tell us where we are in this revolution?
Yeah, so I absolutely agree. And we are in the first inning, and it's maybe a 18-inning ball game. I mean, we're really just getting started. I think, you know, it really is an incredible time. We're very fortunate to be able to work in this space right now because there is so much that's happening. There's these, this convergence of enablers. So now you have this incredible computing device in your pocket that has access to, you know, an infinite amount of information. You've got wearables that are, you know, providing you data that was just never accessible before. You've got artificial intelligence. You've got all these things, but you know, again, we are still just scratching the surface, I think, of what could be done. You know, right now, I think people are doing a pretty decent job of making data available. So kind of making, we call it making the invisible visible. So you can now see very easily how many steps you take, and that changes your behavior. You park further away, or you take different routes. But you know, we really got to get more towards coaching, where we're taking all that data and giving you recommendations and insights that you know, continually nudge you in the right direction. And we have a lot of ideas on how to do that. I can't talk about, unfortunately, a lot of them today, but we're pretty excited about what we think is possible.
Let's be sure that everybody knows what MyFitnessPal, the latest version, does. Do you want to tell us about that, Albert?
Sure.
Because maybe someone doesn't.
What MyFitnessPal is essentially an application that makes it easy to track what you eat and the exercise that you perform. And through that, we can provide you with insights that help you make healthier choices. So I bet some people in the audience are kind of familiar with the concept of keeping a food journal. And that was really what Mike had been asked to do by that trainer. And in a way, we've really digitized that and made that as easy as, you know, it's ever been before. And that's really the core of MyFitnessPal, is trying to give you the information that you need to make easier and healthier decisions.
Yeah.
Nice. Let's think back to the early days of MyFitnessPal, because that's where most entrepreneurs are starting, in the early days.
Yeah.
What were the scariest, hardest things about that time, besides not having money? And what do you think are the best decisions you made then?
Man, well, honestly, I mean, the money thing was pretty scary. You know, we were very fortunate, both of us, that we had wives that were working and that were very, very supportive. So that's really how we made it work. You know, I mean, we didn't make any money for, what, 2-3 years at least. You know, there were things like, I remember one day we had a bug where our app, we couldn't actually sign anybody up anymore. And all of a sudden, like the downloads, the ratings, everything went crazy. You know, we weren't sure how we were going to get back. I mean, there are all sorts of things like that. Entrepreneurship is a roller coaster. I mean, you're always, you have a plan, and then everything changes, right? And so a big part of what you have to do as an entrepreneur is to be nimble, to adjust, to be comfortable with chaos. We've certainly gotten a lot more used to chaos over the last 10 years, but also then having the steadiness to know, okay, a lot of things are changing around me, but I know where we're trying to go, and keeping the team and even yourself really focused on that long-term vision, I think, is really key. In terms of best decisions, I mean, there's a bunch. You know, I think one is we really tried to understand what really mattered to our company, the things that we really needed to focus on to be successful. And that's actually much harder to do than you would think. You know, there's a lot of noise in your KPIs or all these different things, but you know, fundamentally what we realize is that the thing that really matters in our business is our users succeeding. You know, if our customers are succeeding in reaching their health and fitness goals, then we will succeed as a company because it's easy to grow, it's easy to make money, it's easy to do all these things if your product works, if people love it. And so we really try, even today, to hammer that home to our team that is the one thing that matters, that we always have to be getting better at. And that was a very powerful insight for us quite a while back. Yeah. Another one which I hope we will talk about is raising money. We actually agonized over that decision. And
You
we took
didn't
the
really
plunge.
need to raise money, did you?
We did
Or
not.
Did you?
We did not need to raise money.
And when did you do that? When did you agonize over that? Well, actually, before we talk about that,
Yeah.
did you ever think about giving up?
We didn't really have a choice anymore. Right?
I didn't even think about starting the thing. Mike was the one who made me do it, so I couldn't give up. I don't think we ever did. I don't ever remember a time where it was like, oh, this is getting too hard.
No, I mean, as stressful as it was, we were having fun. I mean,
This business was growing. You were at cash flow break even.
yeah, and even the hard parts, at least the problems that we had were our own problems. I mean, it's so much more frustrating when somebody else is making a bad decision that you knew was a bad decision you had to suffer the consequences of.
Yeah.
At least if it was your own bad decision, you know, you could live with that.
Right. Okay, so then you got this business, it's cash flow positive, it's growing nicely, it's the market leader, and you're thinking about taking some capital.
Yeah, so we didn't need to raise money. We actually had people, VCs come by, and we were getting emails all the time. Literally, some more knocks on the door, just unsolicited people would show up at our office. So we were really lucky, you know, that we had a great business that was growing. But you know, we wanted to take it to the next level. I think the more we realized the opportunity that MyFitnessPal had, I think people look at it as a calorie counter, but it is so much more. There's so much more that we can do. And when we started realizing that we really wanted to go big, that's when we started thinking a lot about raising money. And but we did agonize about it. We didn't know if it would change the company. We didn't know if we would, you know, we liked being our own bosses. Would that feel different with a venture partner? You know, we did meet John. John is a pretty convincing guy. He is quite charming. And he was pretty hard to resist. So we took the plunge. And honestly, when you're talking about, you know, decisions that we think were really impactful on the company, that was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, decision. It changed our company. It leveled everything up. You know, we were hiring different people all of a sudden than we could have when we were bootstrapped. We were getting like even just our ambitions, like the way we would talk about them with John, or the way John would talk about them, kind of expanded how we were looking at the business. I'm sure the people at Kleiner, I mean, they were incredibly generous with their time. They were such good partners to us. I'm sure they were probably a little bit annoyed with us because we were calling them all the time, asking for help with every little thing. But as an entrepreneur, you're struggling. Like even things like, I didn't know, how big is the office that we should get? Like, it seems like a trivial decision, but that's actually like a pretty impactful thing. There's quite a bit that we have to spend on that, and I've never done this before. I'd never been a CEO of a startup before, but we could call John, we could call the people at Kleiner, and they could say, oh, well, it's this stage, this is what you need to think about, and it was just really, really helpful. We definitely could not have had the outcome that we had without Kleiner support.
So what's your best advice to entrepreneurs who are raising money for the first time, whether it's from angels or VCs or?
Well, I would really, and I say this with all genuineness, and this is what we did. I would look much more at who the partner is, and like the firm over the terms and all that kind of stuff. I think you gotta optimize this for the long term, and choosing the right partner has an incredible. That's much more important than.
So that's one thing. Another thing?
Well, I think one thing that people commonly do, like when I talk to a lot of startups, is they don't actually try to speak to VCs until they feel like it is time to raise money. And I think the benefit that we had, I think, is we actually had a long period of time before we were actively fundraising, where we were getting to know
Talk to
partners.
a lot of people.
So,
Yeah.
get out there and actually meet people ahead of time and get to know them, because you don't want it to be a situation where you're trying to raise money, you have like a 2-week window in which you want to do that, and you're at the same time really trying to get to know somebody that you may work with for 10, 15 years.
And did
You're
you
getting
check,
married.
Did you check references on people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
How'd you do that?
We made a lot of phone calls about you, John. We made a lot of phone calls.
Yeah.
Yep. You have a lot of friends.
Well, a lot of other entrepreneurs are really happy to help you with that stuff.
Yeah.
And most of the partnerships that we spoke to were also more than willing to say, hey, here's who do you want to talk to? Here's companies that we work with.
Yeah.
We'll introduce you to any of them. So.
Yeah. And we also really tried to find people who had worked with Kleiner or with the other VCs that we were looking at, and that things hadn't gone so well. That's when you really learn, I think, what people are all about, and that was really helpful.
It was easy to find a lot of that.
Yep. Yep.
So, what were the downsides of taking external capital?
Well, downsides.
I think, it's funny
Oh, I can
because
think
I know one thing that happened, which was, and we were warned about this a lot, because we were like, we were these bootstrap guys. We were very disciplined, right? Because we always had to spend money that we made, and it was never
We were
like
spending our own money.
Right. It wasn't spending
our
other
own money
people's
that we were
money.
spending. Yeah.
And they said, as soon as you raise money, you're going to look in your bank account, you're going to see how much money is in there, and like you're going to start forgetting some of that discipline. And I think that did happen to a degree to us.
Yeah.
It is hard. You start looking at things in a bigger way, and you start thinking about your team in a different way, and you start scaling a lot of things differently than you may have before, and it takes some time to recalibrate yourself.
Yeah.
I think we did find a point where we were able to sort of pull that back in
Pull the
to an
reins back in.
appropriate level, but it took
Yeah.
some time.
Yeah, we definitely got loose after we raised. And the thing is when you raise money, like you want to be aggressive.
You want to invest.
Yeah, so you
'Cause I
have
think
to.
You were 40 million users maybe when we invested,
yep.
and
Yeah.
18 months grew to 70 million.
Yeah, no, it definitely accelerated us. I think you just want that acceleration to be in a disciplined way where
Right.
you're making intentional bets versus just, let's spend a little more, right? You got to be thoughtful about how you spend the money.
And then somebody else knocked on your door. I guess Under Armour came along.
Yeah,
And I think of Under Armour as athletic gear and wear.
yeah.
And tell us how you approached that.
Well, that's an interesting story. So, we weren't looking to sell the company at all. Things were going great. We were actually in the midst of, looking at raising another round. We thought the timing was good, and that's when Under Armour gave us a call and said, "Hey, are you guys interested in getting acquired?" And we said, "No, we're not interested in being acquired." And they said, "Well," and these guys are also pretty charming, and they said, "Well, why don't you guys come out and just come meet our CEO? You can see what the company's like." And so we said, "Oh, sure, why not? We'll just come out. I mean, at the very least, they could be a good partner to us." And when we got there, honestly, we fell in love, I think, a little bit. Under Armour's really an amazing company. It's a 10,000 person company, but it acts like a startup. It is fast-paced. It is very entrepreneurial.
Hard-charging.
Hard charging. The founder is an entrepreneur's entrepreneur, right?
They're eating Nike's lunch, right?
They are. We are. There are just things like, we didn't want to work at a place that felt too corporate, and Under Armour does not feel corporate. Like the campus has a train track that runs through the middle of it. And so sometimes when you're on campus, literally this freight train will come by and you can't cross to the other building because the train is coming through. So you'll be late, you'll be 15 to 20 minutes late. But I don't know, when that train went by, I just loved it. I love the fact that, no, this is like a gritty, this is a company that's more about let's get some stuff done, let's do great work.
Yeah.
So and then the deal came together. The price was right. We wanted to make sure you guys were happy, we were happy, and that's how it all happened. Yep.
Right. Do you remember how long it took for you to decide to do this? From that first meeting to...
Start to finish was probably 3-4 months,
Yeah.
till the deal closed, which were some of the most stressful months of my life. But it turned out okay.
And what was the reaction in the team when you told them we're now going to be
Yeah.
part of Under Armour?
Yeah, so there was a lot of shock. I think, I don't think that, I think people had kind of gotten wind that something was going on. We were, shuffling papers around and, it was hard for us. We couldn't, Under Armour's a public company, we couldn't reveal too much to the team. But I think they knew something was up, and then when we announced it, I think everybody thought it would be Google or Apple or Yahoo, and when they found out it was Under Armour, it was a bit of a surprise. But I think that's one of the challenges as a CEO is you have to lead your team through these transitions, and that's what we tried to do to explain to people, this is what we like about Under Armour. This is why we think this makes sense. For us, we had 3 or 4 months to get to know Under Armour, what it was like. For our team, they had 30 seconds before they kind of found out the news, and so we spent a lot of time trying to get people comfortable. Like the first thing we did was we threw a big party. And Under Armour was so great about this. They actually, their CEO flew out. Remember, this is a 10,000 person company. Their CEO flies out to meet our little 100-person team, right? Not only that, we had the party at AT&T Park. So, it's just this little venue up in San Francisco, and our logo is on the billboard, and they had athletes fly out. So they had 4 professional athletes who came and did a little talk in front of us, and it was incredible, and so, Al and I were looking up at the billboard and thinking, that's our logo, 8 years ago, it was me and Albert in a room that we couldn't afford 2 cubicles, so we could only afford 1. And he sat that way, and I sat this way, and now we're at AT&T Park, and it was pretty amazing.
Okay, so that was when you decided, and they valued the company. I think it was reported $400 million.
475.
$475 million. Congratulations.
Thank you.
How's it turned out since then?
Thanks.
How has it turned out since then?
Yeah. I don't know. You want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, it's been great. I think we tried during that 2 to 3 months to really figure out the things that we thought would matter to us, right? Beyond what is the price that you're willing to pay for this business?
Sure.
But, what is your mission? What do you guys care about as a company? And Under Armour's mission is to make all athletes better. And, they believe a big part of that is enabling people, essentially empowering them through health and fitness to become a better athlete, that everybody has that inside of them. And we felt that that was very well aligned with what we wanted to do and what we wanted to continue doing at MyFitnessPal. And so that was a really big part of the vetting process, and it's proven to be a big part of why I think we really enjoy working within Under Armour, because we have stayed true to that mission. And in a sense, we haven't had to change that much about what we want to do and how we want to do it. I think Kevin Plank, the CEO of Under Armour, is a founder himself. He's a guy that started this business in his grandmother's basement. And I think he can really relate to us in our story, which also helps a lot. Because I think as we talk to him about the trials and sort of tribulations of going through this process of merging into a bigger company, he has a lot of empathy for the challenges that we're facing, and that also helps a ton.
And I think
Plus, it's a super fun company.
Yeah, the culture also. It's so important that our cultures matched. Really amazing people at Under Armour, really smart, high energy, want to get stuff done, very entrepreneurial, and just great teammates. We call each other at Under Armour teammates. That's a big part of the culture there, and it really is a team. And I think that's the kind of culture that we had, and I think that was a great fit, and I think that's one of the reasons why the acquisition has worked.
So you were very clear that the missions were aligned and the cultures were compatible.
Yes.
Are the cultures the same, in fact, across the company?
No.
How do they differ?
There are definitely differences. I think, I guess one of the things that we tried to do when we were, Under Armour at the time, they didn't just acquire MyFitnessPal, they actually acquired
they
2
bought
other
some other
companies.
software companies.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
How did they put those together?
Yeah, that's typical Under Armour that's one aspect of Under Armour culture. It's like, let's not buy one company, let's buy 3. You know, that's the kind of aggression that Under Armour has. You know, so we weren't just bringing one company together, 2 companies together, we were bringing 4 companies together. And one of the things we really tried to do was not impose any one culture on all of us, but rather to try to celebrate them all and understand the differences in how we could take the best of all of them and then try to create something that really was all of ours. And again, like that's pretty amazing for a company like Under Armour, 10,000 person company wanting to adapt some of the things that we had come up with was pretty amazing.
And they asked you to lead all of their software efforts, is that right?
Yeah.
Under Armour acquired MyFitnessPal, but MyFitnessPal took over Under Armour software.
Yeah, yep, that is how it turned out.
So let's close on the following. What is your advice to founders and entrepreneurs about culture? Is it important? Is it even possible to figure that out early in a company? What does culture mean, or is that something you do later on?
No. I mean, I think a lot of the culture is going to come from you as the founder, right? Like, it's pretty hard to have a culture that isn't aligned with your natural personality. But I do think it's incredibly important. I think, you know, look at how competitive it is to hire in the Valley, you know, and also when you go through an acquisition, how hard it is to retain the talent that you have. And we have been very successful at doing that, and the reason is our culture. You know, we really worked hard to create a place that embodied the things that we cared about, the values that we cared about, and was a place that we wanted to work at. You know,
how would you describe the culture?
For starters, we care so much about our team, and we are very deliberate about it. It is not just something that we say, some platitude. It is, no, we put a ton of time and energy thinking about the team. How can we make this a better place to work? How can we attract more qualified people? I'll give you an example. We have a very rigorous interviewing process, right? Where again, it's deliberate. We try it's by design. So, for example, we make every person at the company go through a simulation. So nobody can get hired without actually going through a simulation. So my admin that we hired recently had to go through a simulation where we asked her to, you know, told her like a few things about a trip that I needed to go on and asked her to plan it. And we saw, you know, with very little information, what are the kinds of questions that she would ask? How would she? That's the one we found that to be one of the best ways to figure out, you know, if somebody can really do the job or not. And then once you finally find somebody that you think is amazing, how do you close them? You know, so we've thought about things like sending an Uber to go pick them up, to come over. Can we send them a basket of Under Armour goods, right? Like all these kinds of things that we're trying to figure out to build the best team that we can and then make it a great place to work. You know, that is such an advantage if you can make it happen.
I think it's never too early to think about culture for the reasons that Mike is talking about. You know, and I think in the beginning, it's not this deliberate thing. It's really about how you act and how you behave, and that's, you know, I think people will take cues from you as a founder, as a leader in the company, and so you have to be sensitive to that, and maybe that's really your part in establishing the culture in the first place. But, you know, I think what we have found is it is hard to change the culture markedly over time. Right. So as you start to hire people, that really is like solidifying what that culture is going to be. So if you're not actually thinking about that for hire number 4 or 5, then it's going to be much harder when you're starting to hire, you know, person 50 or person 100.
Yeah.
And so I think we actually did end up spending a fair amount of time thinking about that, and even in structuring the way that we interviewed people, there was like, well, what characteristics are you looking for? We actually had that as like our checklist. Yeah. Right? Are you somebody who's team-oriented? Are you somebody who has like a lean-forward attitude? Do you have these things that we value? And so I think that's a really important thing to be thinking about.
Well, Albert and Michael, this has been, for me, a great conversation. It brings back a lot of wonderful memories, but I also think for us to hear from you the story of bootstrapping the business, starting it together, growing it, making the decisions to raise capital, to be part of a larger organization, and how you bound it all together with culture. That's a great gift. And the gift is not only your time for us now, but the gift of having built a healthy company, a thriving company that makes a healthier planet. I just know I can speak on behalf of everyone here to thank you for doing all those things. Thanks for having me on your journey.
Thank you. Thanks so much, John. All right. Oh, thank you.
Thanks, guys, so much.
Appreciate
It's
it.
just great to have you here.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
sharing your time with us and all your insights. And John, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I'm going to leave you just with a couple of thoughts. This is a sampler today of the kind of thinking and dialogue and ongoing examination of entrepreneurship that we want to include in our interpretation of the history of computing. And I hope you've enjoyed it. Live events and thought leadership are going to be an important component of this. I want to say, too, that last night we added another element, which is to honor people who've been part of this history over time and the whole ecosystem that it takes to bring this kind of change about in the world. And John and Regis and Jay and Gordon were all honored last night as our first Exponential honorees, along with Larry Sonsini and Arthur Rock, all names that I think are probably quite familiar to you, and we were delighted to honor them here tonight. There's one other entrepreneur in the room that needs to be recognized, and that's our chairman, Lynn Shestak. Recognized today. It's been a long day, Lynn, but we're recognizing him today. Lynn and his partner, Harry Saul, were truly path-breaking entrepreneurs here in Silicon Valley with Network General. And then 20 years ago this year, Lynn took a leap off a cliff and decided that another type of computer history museum needed to exist in the world, quite different from the one that was taking place in Boston. He started this museum in Quonset huts at Moffett Field. So you talk about bootstrapping. That is bootstrapping. And now here we are today, and what you're seeing and hearing today is really just an extension of Lynn's vision for this museum as an important 100-year institution. So I wanted to be sure and say congratulations and thank you to Lynn. If you are regulars to our homepage, you will see we now have a new tab at the top of the homepage called Centers. And if you want to know more about Exponential and about our Center on Software History, you can go there. If you subscribe to our mailing lists and our outbound emails, you'll get more information about these live events. Both of those centers are going to be generating a lot of live events over the coming years, and I hope that all of them are as illuminating and fun as they have been today. So thank you very much for coming. We hope to see you again soon, and have a wonderful weekend.